Can I call you Rose? 'Cause you're sweet like a flower in bloom.
Hey y'all, I'm Madison Rose Underwood and welcome to my very first video. I've been thinking about what story to share first, and I keep coming back to the summer of 2012, what my family now calls the summer that changed everything. I was 13 that year, stuck right in the middle of my siblings and right in the middle of that awkward phase where you're not quite a child anymore, but definitely not grown. My older brother Elijah was heading to college that fall. My older sister Caroline was deep in her high school queen bee phase, and my younger siblings Jackson and Savannah were still just kids, really. Now, every summer our family tradition was to spend 2 weeks at my mama's family home in New Orleans. Daddy would grumble about leaving Houston for that long, but he never could say no to Mama. She'd pack us all up in our old Suburban, which we called the Beast, and we'd make the 5-hour drive east. But this particular summer was different. My grandma Rose, yes, that's where my middle name comes from, had passed away that spring. It was the first time we'd be going to New Orleans without her there to greet us with her famous peach sweet tea and beignets. The drive was quieter than usual. Even Savannah, who usually sang at the top of her lungs the whole way, just stared out the window. When we pulled up to Grandma's house, this beautiful old shotgun home in the Bywater neighborhood with the most gorgeous peacock blue shutters, it felt different, empty somehow, even though it was still full of her things. Mama tried to keep it together, but I caught her crying in the kitchen that first night holding one of Grandma's old recipe cards. That's when Daddy surprised us all. See, my daddy is a practical Houston businessman through and through. He doesn't do sentimentality or big emotional displays. But that night, he gathered us all in the living room and said, "This house still has stories to tell. Rose wouldn't want us sitting around moping. We're gonna spend these 2 weeks finding Rosie's stories." Now, none of us knew what he meant, but the next morning, Daddy handed each of us a small notebook and said we had a mission to find pieces of Grandma's life we never knew about. We'd each take a different room and look for clues, old letters, photographs, trinkets, anything that might tell us something new about her. Y'all, I got the attic. Let me tell you, in a New Orleans house that's over 100 years old, the attic is both the scariest and most magical place you could imagine. It was hot as blazes up there with just one little window letting in dusty sunlight. But what I found this, Grandma's memory box, and inside was something none of us ever knew about her. Letters, dozens of them, from a man named James Laurent. Not my grandfather, someone else entirely. They were love letters, y'all. Beautiful, poetic love letters from the 1940s. It turns out my proper church-going Grandma Rose had a whole secret romance before she met my grandfather. James was a jazz musician who played at the clubs where Grandma worked as a hostess. Her parents didn't approve. He was from the wrong side of town, as they say, and eventually she chose the path her family wanted. I sat in that hot attic for hours, reading every single letter. I learned that my grandmother wasn't just the cookie-baking Sunday school teaching woman I knew. She was once a young woman with dreams of living a bohemian life, following a jazz band around the country, writing poetry. She had fire in her that I never knew about. When I finally came downstairs, covered in dust and cobwebs, clutching that box, my whole family gathered around the kitchen table. Turns out everyone had found something. Caroline discovered Grandma's flapper dress hidden in the back of her closet. Elijah found medals from her volunteer work during Hurricane Betsy that she never talked about. Jackson found her journal where she wrote about learning to drive at 40 years old, terrified but determined. And little Savannah found a collection of pressed flowers with tiny notes about when and where they were picked, including one from the day each of her grandchildren was born. That night, we spread everything across the dining room table, this beautiful mosaic of a life. A complex, fascinating life that we had only known pieces of. And we started telling stories, filling in gaps for each other, asking questions, laughing about things we remembered, and wondering about the parts we'd never know. You know what's amazing? By the end of those 2 weeks, that house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt more full somehow. Like we'd found more of Grandma there than had ever been there when she was alive. That summer taught me something I've never forgotten. Everyone has so many layers to them, so many stories that make up who they are. The quiet grandmother might once have danced until dawn in jazz clubs. The practical father might be capable of the most beautiful sentiment when it matters most. And that shy 13-year-old girl might someday find her voice to share stories on YouTube. I've been collecting stories ever since, my own and others, because that's what I learned that summer. Stories don't just entertain us, they connect us. They help us see each other and ourselves more completely. That's what I hope to share here on this channel. Stories that remind us that people are always more complicated, more interesting, and more beautiful than they first appear. So, what's a story that changed how you see someone in your family? I'd love to hear in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this little journey into my past, hit subscribe to join me for more stories from my little corner of the South. Until next time, y'all, this is Madison Rose Underwood, signing off with my grandma's favorite saying, "Life's too short for bad tea and untold stories."
Blue